The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 151. March Madness is here, and spring football practice is underway. This is the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I'm out of town this week on my own spring break, but before I packed and headed for sunny Alabama, I had a chance to do a spring football preview with beat writer Kyle Meinke from MLive.com. That is coming up in just a minute or so on our Michigan Gameday segment. By now, we all know where Coach Beilein and his Wolverines will be playing this week, and the same is true for Coach Barnes-Arico and the ladies. We also know if hockey's NCAA tournament streak is still alive. Hopefully it is. It truly is March Madness. So let's enjoy everything that's going on this week on the Wolverine athletic scene. Spring practice got underway on Saturday. The transition from the Denard Robinson era is now underway. To be sure, there are tons of question marks on both sides of the ball that Coach Hoke and his staff need to address in the next few weeks. It should be very interesting. Coming up next, we talk some spring football with beat writer Kyle Meinke from MLive.com. Here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Back with us on Michigan Game Day is football beat writer Kyle Meinke from MLive. Kyle, it's been a while. Great to talk some Michigan football again.
Yeah, let's do it. It's getting close, right?
Well, it is close. As a matter of fact, spring football is underway. And before we talk about the actual practices, Thursday was a busy day for you guys and for all of the beat writers. A lot was going on with Coach Brady Hoke meeting with the media, the first presser of the spring. Also Pro Day with a lot going on. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that happened that day.
Yeah, it was a busy day, kind of a ceremonial type, I would say, start to the season. It was, I think Brady was about as expected. He was in tight form. He basically saying we need the running game going after struggling so much last year. Just getting those guys going on the ground, and of course you lose to Denard Robinson, your most effective runner. And that was a point of emphasis. Obviously, Toussaint and Derek Green, the incoming freshmen, they won't be in camp. So he really stressed the importance of getting Justice Hayes and Thomas Rawls some snaps and getting those guys experience and trying to get them on track. And then, of course, the offensive line. That was a big point with him too. You're losing three starters in the middle up there. So those are the two big key points that he touched on. And, of course, Devin Gardner, coming back at quarterback, Brady with his coach speak in mid-season form already, not naming Devin Gardner as a starting quarterback. I said that can't be assumed, even though I think we'll still assume it. But he said that Shane Morris isn't a lock to redshirt. He'll come in and compete, whatever that means. So I guess he'll probably compete for his backup job. But, and then, of course, Russell Bunny is in the conversation as well. So those are the main things Brady hit on. And then, of course, back to Roy Manning as well, the new outside linebackers coach. I was really thrilled to talk to him. I had talked to Elliot Mueller and some other players who had played under him when he was a graduate assistant a couple of seasons ago at Michigan in 2011. He worked with the offensive line that year. And all you ever heard from any of these guys was about his enthusiasm and his love for Michigan. And you get kind of those kinds of quotes with everyone when they get hired or a recruit comes in or a new coach or whatever. But you talk to Roy Manning for 2 minutes and you see exactly what they're talking about. I mean, there is no lying there. And so I really enjoyed being able to talk to him and see that enthusiasm, that youth, and that relatability that everyone was talking about. I think he'll be a pretty effective recruiter at least. And then, the pro day stuff. And it's kind of interesting. Their pro day was close to the media, which is kind of a rare thing, but that's the way they do it. And so we don't have full results for all of these guys. It sounds like Jordan Kovacs actually had a really good day. He actually answered some questions about his speed. And Denard Robinson continued his move to receiver and did some tailback things as well. So that was a busy first day. And I think everyone's getting kind of excited for the spring ball to be going.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It seems like it's been a long time. It's only been 2 months, but we're ready for some football talk. Of course, not a lot tends to leak out from football practice, but let's talk about some of the things that fans are really interested in, Kyle.
Yeah.
I mean, first off, recently Devin Gardner said after waiting, and as he said in a recent interview on WDFN in Detroit, waiting not so patiently the last few years for his chance, it's now Devin Gardner's time, isn't it?
It is, and like I alluded to before, the first press conference, Brady said exactly what I guess I would expect him to say, which is you can't assume that he's going to be the starter, and that Russell Bellamy and when Shane Morris gets here in the fall, those guys will compete. But that's what Brady has to say. That's what he has to say as head coach of this football team. We all know exactly who that number one guy is, and if it's not Devin Gardner, you probably had a serious problem. He's a great player. We saw that in the final 5 games of last year, and it was pretty amazing. I was really shocked at what we saw last year because he was a good player always, but when he got in there, when Denard Robinson was here, he wasn't necessarily this really hyped player that we had expected to see. We had heard about the dual threatness and being able to throw it on the field, and I thought he struggled a little bit when he came in for Denard Robinson. And then last year, when Denard Robinson got hurt and he had to play, and he had been playing receiver, and he had to move back to quarterback, I thought he looked better than he ever did before. And he showed us some things that I think is really going to make him an effective player in that scheme that Al Borges wants to run. And as you said, Mike, every time I talk to the kid, it's just, you see these big eyeballs. It's like, okay, this is my chance. And he knows exactly what's before him, and he has made no mistake about it throughout this whole process, even when he moves to receiver, that he views himself as a quarterback and that he was biding his time. And he even told us last year at one point, one of the pressers, that he thought he was like basically dead even with Denard in fall camp in 2010 when Denard won the starting job for the first time. And he said that Denard beat me out, then he went on to do what he did. And you can't fault that. That's bad luck for me, but I'm just going to try harder, and when my time comes, I'll be ready. And that's what we saw last year against Minnesota and the 4 games after that. And I think given a full off season of that earnestness of knowing that this is his team, and then the off season to really work with Al Borges and slow things down and put in a new pro style offense that really fits that big arm and the mobility, I think we can expect a leap forward. I really do.
Yeah, I think what we have to take from last year when he took over for Denard, too, is we have to keep in mind as fans that he really wasn't getting the reps in practice, and he stepped in, and, despite that, he got better and better each game, and it makes you think, hey, he's had the off season, he has spring ball coming up, he's going to get to work with Coach Borges. It really is fascinating to think about what we're going to see from him in the fall.
You're absolutely right, and the people I've talked to have said that when he was playing receiver, and then Denard got hurt against Nebraska. There was the big uproar of, okay, we saw Bellamy, and he really struggled, and he really, really struggled in that game. Why didn't we see Devin? So I asked some people, and they basically said that Devin Gardner at that point was getting 0 quarterback snaps, 0. He was a receiver straight up, and that's why he didn't play there. And that, to me, is what makes it really remarkable what he was able to do, because there's so much more that goes into quarterback than throwing the football around or even running the football. Even the small things of even being able to hand off the ball to your tailbacks. I mean, those things take lots of time and lots of reps and lots of work. And you have basically 4 days to do that. to do the small things, to pick up pass protections, to knowing where you have to be to hand the ball off and all this stuff. And then, of course, all the intricacies that go into it, being able to read a defense and make passes and so on, everything a quarterback has to do. And he did that. I mean, he was damn good, Mike, and I couldn't really believe it, you know. And I think, like you said, you know, give him an off season to work the stuff out, slow the game down, really get a game plan. And I think they really focused on, okay, we're playing Iowa this week. Here's exactly what we're going to do to beat Iowa. But that was it. I mean, it was all surface level stuff. I think it was very targeted what they did in practices, because they only had, you know, 3 or 4 days each week really to put in what they had to put in. And I think give them a full off season, put in real offense, you know, let them develop some nuance and get comfortable with the receivers. I do expect to see a big step forward with Devin Gardner.
And, you know, the one thing I think Michigan fans are a little bit concerned about, though, Kyle, is the depth at that quarterback position. We know Devin got his medical redshirt year, so he can be around for 2 years. We have Russell Bellamy, who is fighting for a backup job. And then you have Shane Morris coming in. You get the feeling they would like to redshirt him, but that depth issue is something that might force him to see some playing time this year, or at least be active.
Yeah, that's a huge question going into next season, and there's no answer right now. I mean, even on the Michigan team, Michigan staff, Michigan players. I think what's going to happen is, you know, because right now you have 2 scholarship quarterbacks on the team until Shane Morris gets here. It's Gardner and it's Bellamy. So throughout spring camp, those guys are getting a full complement of reps. And of course, you know, they're trying to prep Gardner to be the starter next year. But Bellamy's going to get a ton of snaps too, because, you know, these guys rotate in and out throughout practice. And I think that they're going to look at him really hard and try to develop him and try to figure out, can this guy be our backup? And I think they'll have a good feel for the answer to that question by the end of camp, because, like I said, he's going to get just a crap load of reps. And they're going to figure out and get a feel for what he can do. Because we did see that he struggled last year when he got in there. There were some serious concerns about him as a quarterback. So they'll try to figure out, okay, can he get the job done? The answer is yes, and I think that they will try their best to redshirt Shane Morris. You know, there's no guarantees, but that's what they'll try to do. But if he, you know, with Devin Gardner having 2 years and stuff, that's really the optimal, I think, outcome of the season for Shane Morris. But if Russell Bellamy can't do that job, if the staff feels like that he can't do the job, then I don't think they'll be scared to strip the red shirt from Shane Morris, because you have to have 2 quarterbacks ready. And we saw last year what happens if you don't have a backup quarterback ready. That probably cost Michigan a shot at the Big Ten title, not having a guy ready behind him. And especially with a guy who's mobile like Devin Gardner. I mean, Al Borges has already said, yes, we're moving to the pro style. Yes, we'll be throwing it. We'll be running with tailbacks. We're still going to run the quarterback. Devin can still do that. And, you know, he's not the Bernard Robinson, but that's still something he can do in his game that induces a threat to defenses. So we're going to use that. And if you have a quarterback running around, you have to have a backup ready. So I think that's where Michigan stands going next year. They'd like to redshirt Morris, but it's kind of going to depend on Bellamy and his development.
So Kyle, let's talk about the backs. We know Derek Green will be here in the fall, and Fitz Toussaint will join him if healthy. I guess that's a wait-and-see kind of a proposition. But this spring, you've got Thomas Rawls, Justice Hayes, and Drake Johnson, who I'm starting to hear about, and they are going to get a lot of reps, and they can make their case for more playing time. So it is a pivotal spring for those 3, isn't it?
It is, yeah, because when the fall camp gets here, I can tell you right now that Toussaint is going to get a ton of reps, because he was the starter the past 2 years, and he's going to be limited throughout spring camp, and I think maybe a little bit into the summer, still recovering from that broken leg. But he's expected to be 100% by the start of fall camp. So he's going to get a ton of reps just trying to get back from that injury. I think Michigan, no matter what happens to Derek Green, they still view him as a very important part of the offense and the running game next season, just with his experience. And I think he'll probably be the best pass protector, probably. So he's going to have a role no matter what. And, of course, Derek Green, again, gives him a ton of looks, because I think that, you know, they view him as the future, certainly. And it comes down to just a matter of when he can produce, and maybe when he picks up some of those pass protection type things, which are typically the last thing to come for a freshman tailback. But, you know, people I talk to say tailback's the easiest position for any of these players to come in as freshmen and contribute. And he's the best freshman in the country at that position, at least according to two different recruiting rankings. So I think the deal is that when the fall gets here, those 2 guys are going to get a ton of reps, and Michigan can give them a bunch of looks. That means if Thomas Rawls is going to see the field next year a bunch, or if Drake Johnson is going to see the field, or Justice Hayes, if they're going to see the field next year, now is the time they have to start making some noise, because they're not going to get those kind of quality looks in practice in the fall that they'll get now. They'll be the guys in the fall, in the spring, without Toussaint here, without Green here. And I think now is the time that they really have to make some noise and show that they've developed, since they had opportunities last year and they didn't capitalize. And I think now is when they have to show that they've developed, or they could get lost in the rotation.
Yeah, well, Thomas Rawls definitely had his chance last year. Justice Hayes got some action. Drake Johnson is the intriguing one in that mix to me. We all know from here in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, what his reputation was. He had an incredible high school career, a great sprinter, and it seemed like in the bowl preparation practices, a lot of Michigan's players talked about Drake Johnson really looking good. So I'm interested to see what this kid brings to the table this spring.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, they're looking for anybody and everybody that can contribute at that position. Michigan's tailbacks last year, their production. If you take out Denard Robinson, who played quarterback for 98% of the year, take him out of the equation. The tailbacks had their worst per game rushing season in their modern history at Michigan. I mean, I think it was 80-something yards. I don't have the stat in front of me, but it was the worst production in the modern history of the school from the tailbacks. So there are some real issues there. And, of course, the offensive line didn't do its job. We heard that time and time again, and everyone I've talked to says the same thing, even off the record. They say, yeah, the offensive line was a mess. Didn't get the job done. Okay. So, I mean, we can see that in film, too. Toussaint gets the ball, and there's two guys in the backfield tackling him before he's made a step. Okay. But, there comes a point, too, I think, when the tailback's job is to make plays. And, so this is like a dual thing, the burden and the blame for what happened last year. But at the end of the day, the tailback still has to make some plays. And we didn't see very much of that last year. We didn't see a guy breaking tackles and taking off for 60 yards. And I think that's what they're looking for from some of these guys. And, I think Drake Johnson, to get back to your point, is, he's I haven't seen him play. So I'm always hesitant to judge a guy before I've seen him play. But I think that he's going to have a chance in spring camp before Green gets here in the fall, before Toussaint gets healthy. Because I think we've seen what we get from Rawls, and I think we've seen from what we get from Hayes. And those guys can get better, sure, but I really believe the coaching staff is intrigued by Drake Johnson, and they want to get a feel for what they have in him before those guys get here in the fall. Because he's a redshirt freshman, so he didn't get any game time last year. So I think he'll get a bunch of looks. I really do, right alongside with Hayes and Rawls. And I think Michigan's kind of looking for one guy of those three to step up, and then they'll be the complement to Toussaint and Green come fall.
Well, that's going to be an interesting process to watch. The other thing with Coach Borges' offense finally taking shape here in the third year is that there's going to be more emphasis on the fullback position. Talk a little bit about the competition at that position.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I wasn't expecting that one. Joe Carriage, I think, is going to be the leader coming in. They have a recruit, Sion Huma, who came in last year in 2012, and he played a lot of special teams and stuff, so he's actually a sophomore, even though he didn't really play any fullback. So I guess he's in the equation too. But Joe Carriage, I know, is a guy that Brady Hook really loves. You should see his face every time he gets brought up, or the fullback position gets brought up. He's just a walk-on, and I didn't really know much about him last year going into the season. I just knew Stephen Hopkins, who was a scholarship player and a former tailback, who moved to fullback. But Carriage actually overtook Hopkins, scholarship player, midway through last season for that position. Hopkins got hurt for a game or two with a hamstring, and Carriage stepped in and never left the lineup again. I think Brady's really comfortable with his blocking, and really that's the foremost responsibility of a fullback is, kind of his ability to pave the way for the tailbacks and make it a carry here or there. I really thought Hopkins would be a versatile fullback, being able to catch the ball in the backfield as a fullback, that's pretty rare. But, that never came to be, and I think the Hoke's pretty comfortable with Joe Carriage going into the next season. And then you enter Wyatt Shulman, too, as a true freshman, but he's not going to get here until fall camp. And I'm not sure if he's a redshirt or not. I haven't heard anything in that regard on Shulman, but he's a fullback that's coming into the fold as well.
So things are looking better at the fullback position. You're right. Joey Carriage Thing was, he played up at Traverse City St. Francis, very highly regarded player until I think it was a knee injury, wasn't it, his senior year that sort of scared teams off. And he's a walk-on. He was highly regarded in recruiting circles until that injury.
Yeah, that's the story I've heard. I don't know too much about his career. He got to Michigan the year before I did, so I don't know a whole lot about his recruitment. But all I know is that he's a walk-on, and he overtook a scholarship player for a starting job last year. And that's all you need to know about this guy. They don't hand out the starting jobs very easily, and to give it to a walk-on. And Stephen Hopkins left the program at the end of last season. I think he saw the writing on the wall, which is, Carriage is a quality option. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's a redshirt sophomore next year. So he has, he has lots of eligibility left. I think he's going to be in the lineup for time to come, and I think that's a good thing for Michigan because you move into this this power running scheme. You need a fullback who's an effective blocker, and that's exactly what Carriage did. He's not going to get you a bunch of yards. He's not going to catch the ball, but he can block, and that's what you need out of your fullback.
Well, Kyle, the interior of the offensive line, as we know, was gutted by graduation. Even though most of us feel it was pretty ineffective last year, they were seniors. The good news, of course, was Taylor Lewan announcing that he was coming back, and Michael Schofield, of course, is back at right tackle. And now we finally get to see our talented but very inexperienced young guys make their debut. So rebuilding the interior of the offensive line has to be job number one this spring, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's what Brady Hook would tell you too. I mean, you can have a fancy new quarterback in Devin Gardner, and you can have the number one tailback coming into the in Derek Green and all these things that fans talking about. Brady Hook's going to sit there and talk about the offensive line. that's the kind of coach he is, and I think it's and defensive line too. I mean, the lines in general, but this this camp in particular, the offensive line, and I think with reason, because there are some questions there. And I'm always hesitant to say that the offensive line would take a step forward when it loses three starters. I mean, that's a lot of offensive line relies so much on continuity. That's all these guys ever talk about is you need to know what the guy next to you is doing basically. And if you lose three guys from that and you replace them all probably with sophomores or younger, which is what Michigan probably will do. I mean, Joey Brzezinski's in the mix, but the rest of the guys are sophomores or younger. I mean, that's he's kind of tempting fate a little bit, but you allude to it, man. It's Kyle Kalis. He's a big-time prospect all through last season. Taylor Lewan, some of these guys talking about how good he was doing in practice. And if a true freshman can catch an All-American's eye in practice, he's doing something right. But he came in as a five-star prospect. I did a list. I averaged out the Rivals ranking and the Scout ranking for every five-star recruit that came into Michigan since 2002. Kyle Kalis was the 10th best ranked recruit since 2002, and you think about all the quality guys that have come through Michigan, big-time recruits, and he was the 10th best. And that's he came into school with some expectations, and he's going to have to live up to them, I think, quicker than anyone really wanted him to, because he's just a redshirt freshman. But if he doesn't start, I think there's a problem. I think that he needs to start at right guard, which is where he's going to start. And he's battling Kyle Bosch, Brady said, and Kyle Bosch is a true freshman. So I think that's kind of Kalis' job to lose a little bit there at right guard. And he's got all the potential in the world, and I haven't seen him play yet, so like no one has, and so I can't really say too much about what he is like as a player, but I know everyone's really excited about him. At center, basically, you got the same deal. It's kind of you have three candidates. Jack Miller's a sophomore, and then you have Joey Brzezinski, who was a reserve guard last year. He's a former walk-on, but is now under scholarship. He'll be in the mix. And then there's Jack Miller, Joey Brzezinski, and then the incoming freshman Kyle Kugler. I think that he'll be in the equation as well once he gets here. Patrick Kugler when he gets in here in the fall. And then at left guard, there's a bunch of candidates, but I think that Ben Braden, who is another one of those redshirt freshmen you were talking about, he's moved from tackle to left guard. I think he's probably the leader at this point to in that position. But before any practice have occurred, I mean, anything can happen. But I think he's an interesting option at that position because he's about 6'6", 6'7", about three and some change. And you line him up next to Taylor Lewan. That's a big left side of the offensive line. And I think Michigan is going for size, and I think it likes its option there. I mean, he might be a little bit inexperienced, but that's a major heft. 600 pounds, and each of those guys is 6'7", about, between Milan and Braden. So that'd be kind of an interesting starting lineup. And then you throw in Kalis, and of course you got Schofield back. That's a pretty big line, and I think that's what Michigan's going for at this point.
Absolutely. It's nice to see the big bodies back out there. We haven't seen that in a long time. I guess the exception to that on the offensive line this year, there is somewhat of a concern that Jack Miller's a bit undersized at center. He's battling with Graham Glasgow.
Yeah, Graham Glasgow. Thank you for reminding me. That was the last I was forgetting. He's a walk-on, but I know that Hoax mentioned him before, even last year when he wasn't playing. And actually, when I talked to Taylor Lewan a couple months ago and just asked him generally, so what do you think about the line next year? And he mentioned the usual, like Schofield and Kalis. And he's like, I think Glasgow is going to be right there too. I think he's going to be a guy who can really compete for a job. And I was surprised by that. He's a walk-on. He's never really played very much. And he's like, yeah, he practices as well as anyone. He kind of reminds me of a Brzezinski type, where he's physically his tools. You don't think, okay, this guy's a starting offensive lineman at Michigan, but then you line him up in a practice and he kicks everyone's butt. So I think that I think that'll be in the conversation as well as center.
Well, it is the one position group that it takes longer, as you mentioned, continuity. You always hear offensive linemen saying continuity, working time together. You throw these young guys into the mix. The good thing is, we've got a lot of size, a lot of talent, and they should just keep getting better and better as the season progresses.
Absolutely. I think that the line will be better by the start of the Big Ten season than it will be against Central Michigan in the opener. I think that's a certainty, and it'll get better throughout the season. It's just a matter of where's that starting point going to be against Central Michigan. I don't know. I know fans are really excited about Kalis and Braden and some of these redshirt freshmen. I mean, that was a highly, highly touted class from 2012, offensive line class. Those four guys, and Blake Bars is there as well, and Eric Magnuson. All these guys are going to compete for jobs. So I think they'll all be in too deep. So, and I understand the excitement, but I'm just so hesitant on the offensive line. A position that relies so much on continuity, and a position that takes time to pick up. I mean, you don't see too many guys starting before their third years. I mean, I think third year is typically a good time to start. Starting if you're not exceptional, like a Taylor Lewan. I mean, he's a freak, but I think he's kind of the exception to the rule. These guys need time to bulk up. It's such a physically demanding position, so it just makes sense. Looking, if you're 18, you're probably not going to mix it up very well with a 21 or 22-year-old who's been in a college weightlifting program for 5 years. But then beyond all of that, I mean, the protection schemes and all that, it's impossibly complicated. So it takes some time to pick up that nuance and that stuff as well. So for all those reasons, I'm so reticent to say, okay, you plug in some of these really highly touted guys and the line's automatically going to be better than it was last year. I know those guys struggled. I know that the three guys in the middle there especially struggled. And you're replacing them with some highly touted guys, and I understand the excitement. I'm holding off on saying the line's going to be better next year until I've seen some of these guys play. I understand the baseline's not very high. I understand the potential, but we just need to see them play a little bit first. I do think in time the potential is there to be far better than what it was last year, just with what these guys can do, and they're the physical profiles, the big kids. But I think it's just going to take some time to grow together, for that line to grow together, and then move forward and get some experience under the belt.
Yeah, I think you're right. We just have to be a little bit patient there. Things are going to get better, though. The receiving core, seen by many of us as a bit thin, but this spring we're going to get a good look at Darbo and Chesson, a guy we've heard about who really progressed in practice last season. Those two players are more like the kind of receivers that Borges really wants in the offensive mix. They're a little bit bigger, sort of NFL-type bodies. A lot of the critics or observers haven't really taken those two guys into account. They're sort of the X factor in that receiving core, aren't they?
Absolutely. I really like Jeremy Gallon. I mean, I really like his game. I know he's short and everything. I love his game. I think he's a really quality, if not unconventional, number one receiver. I think Michigan has a solid option there, and we saw last year what he and Devin Gardner were able to do. I mean, I think almost 700 or 800 yards, somewhere in that range in 5 games. I mean, he averaged 107 yards receiving per game with Devin Gardner. So I think solid option there. And then Drew Dilio, I think he's a solid, possession type receiver. He'll play in the slot. But who else is there? I mean, you got two good options there. Those guys will start. But there's literally no one else on the roster who has experience. I think the rest of the roster, I looked at it, the rest of the returning roster has like 6 or 7 catches combined among all those guys. I think like 4 of those come from Jeremy Jackson, or 5 of those come from Jeremy Jackson. So there's a major competition there because no matter who wins the job, it's going to be someone that's been experienced. So it's basically, you're going to walk into spring camp and they're all going to fight for that one job. Of course, you need backup roles as well, but I'm saying that there's a major opportunity for playing time. And I think Amar Darbo, and J.U. Chesson, I think one of those guys has to step up. Because one of them's going to play no matter what, at least in the reserve role, no matter how good or bad, I believe. But I think one of those guys is the leading candidate to start at that third spot. I would say throughout, I haven't seen very much of either one. Again, Michigan closes their practices to the media, so I don't get to watch these guys practice or anything like that. But the few practices that I saw down at the Bowl, I really did seek out looking at Amar Darbo because it seems like every time I mention to a player, hey, what these freshmen or redshirt freshmen, you guys who don't play, who really stands out? I mean, Darbo is almost always a name that was included. It seems like, that he's built kind of like Junior Hemingway, big body, like 220 pounds. 225 pounds. I think he's like 6'2" or 6'3". He's built almost exactly like Junior Hemingway, real physical receiver. And so I looked at, I looked for him, and he was impressive. I mean, he was impressive. I know he didn't play very much last year, but I really liked his profile and his presence out there, his athleticism for a guy that big. I do think that he's the leader before any practices happen. I think he's maybe kind of the guy that they're hoping pans out for that third spot. And then, of course, Chesson's there as well. He's more of a speedster type. Another big body guy, 6'3", a tall guy anyway, but a little bit more of a track type guy, downfield threat. He could be in the conversation as well. And then the 3 true freshmen, when they get in the fall too, I think they'll each be given an opportunity to earn some playing time, if not a starting position. So I think that's kind of how it shakes out right now. And then you do have a couple of other guys like Jeremy Jackson or Joe Reynolds who are in the conversation as reserves or whatever, but I do think Darbo and Chesson are the guys they're targeting for that third spot. I do think that Darbo is the leader to win at this point.
Our guest on our spring football preview today is Michigan football beat writer Kyle Meinke from MLive. Kyle, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, spend a little bit of time on that.
Okay.
On the defensive side, we know the biggest loss, to me anyway, and I think most people would agree, was Jordan Kovacs in the secondary and everywhere else he played. The good thing is Blake Countess is back. Talk about that secondary and who we'll see competing back there this spring.
Yeah, I think that's job one this year for this spring for the defense is finding a replacement for Kovacs because he was more than just a safety. He was a 4-year starting safety, and he was a 3-time All Big Ten player. I mean, I could go on and on through all the things that he was able to do in his career. But beyond all of that stuff, all the awards and all of the Big Ten play and all that kind of stuff, he was their spiritual leader. I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but you talk to anyone, and you ask, about Jordan Kovacs, and the players speak with such reverence about Kovacs. You can see the respect. It's tangible, and he was the guy who got everyone into the film rooms on Saturday. He's the guy who got them into early weightlifting sessions. He's the guy who would bark out a freshman or bark out a guy who's out of position. I mean, that's an important role that I think kind of goes unnoticed sometimes. Is who's the guy who's going to be willing to step up and be hard on some guys when they're not doing their jobs. And I think he's that guy. And in game, he was the guy who'd call out audibles. He'd call out a lot of play calls from back there. I mean, the role that he had was so important beyond just the sure tackles and what he was able to do on blitzes and in coverage, the things he did so well. But he was kind of the engine that powered that secondary, certainly, maybe the defense overall. So that's going to be a difficult position to fill. I think that Brady yesterday mentioned at his Thursday press conference mentioned Thomas Gordon as kind of a replacement in that capacity a little bit. He's a third-year starter, going into his third year of starting. He's kind of a little bit of a quieter player, but I think he's been extremely solid. I really like him, and I think that he'll take a step forward just now that he has to be that guy back there. I think that's going to kind of help him almost. He's not in Jordan Kovacs' shadow anymore. I think that he's very capable of transforming into an even better player than what he's done the past couple of years. And then over at corner, you mentioned it, Blake Harness is back, and that's a big story. Brady said that he'll be held out of contact drills at least to start the spring and probably throughout the spring. So he's not quite back yet, but he is doing non-contact stuff. He is working his way back, and JT Floyd told me that he said that Harness has been very involved in film room and things like that, so he's been trying to progress his mental aptitude for the game, even when he hasn't been able to play. So I think that you might see a smarter player when he does get back. And then, of course, Raymond Taylor's back as well. So, in effect, you lose JT Floyd as the starting corner, but you kind of have two starting corners back. So that helps Michigan, I think, a little bit replace what they lose in experience in JT Floyd and Jordan Kovacs back there in the secondary.
On the defensive line, we know we lost Rowe, we lost Campbell, and Coach Montgomery. Big question marks at that position group. But unlike the last 5 years or so, there are players with potential on the scene. Talk about some of those guys and who you expect to see emerge on that defensive line this spring.
For me, defensive line is the position that I have this offseason I have the worst feel for of who's going to emerge or who Michigan really likes at this point. It's really interesting because there was two guys. They lose their most experienced. They lose their most experienced guy in Craig Rowe, and then they lose another All Big Ten player and Will Campbell, who finally kind of turned it on last year as a senior. And just as he was getting good, you lose them. So Campbell's gone at defensive tackle. Craig Rowe's gone at strong side end. So you have two guys to replace. And, so there's turnover, but they have tons of options back. It's pretty incredible. I mean, you look at the roster. I think I looked at the roster the other day. There were 17 defensive linemen last year, and you only lose those two guys. And I mean, they were both starters and everything, but you have 15 bodies back, plus you add a couple of guys in the recruiting class coming in this summer. I mean, your numbers are huge up front on the defensive line, and it's just a matter of who emerges. And I know there's some guys they really like. I think Andre Pipkins is going to play a bigger role next year after playing as a true freshman last year. He'll probably play alongside Quentin Washington and some bigger type defensive lines. And then I think Chris Wormley is going to be in the conversation for more time. Tom Stroll will be in the conversation. Possibly Willie Henry. I think Jabril Block will play an increased role as a senior. I mean, they just have tons of names, and to me, they're pretty interchangeable at this point. There's major jobs up for grabs. Even last year, I think, I thought Brendan Byard had a good season. He started, I think, 7 of the final 8 games down the stretch last year, so he's definitely in the fold for a starting job. But he was pretty even for a while there with Frank Clark. Frank Clark's probably the most athletic guy on that defensive line. So I think that they'll battle for time on the weak side end. It's just they have so many names and so many bodies and so much potential. I mean, they brought in that 6-man defensive line class in 2012, and they're reaching their second year. And I think some of those guys you're going to see some major time from. Ojemudia, that's a name that Brady mentioned as opening presser, and I think Mario Ojemudia really will see a lot of time next year. I think they really like what they have with him. I'm not sure to what position, if that's going to be weak side end or where it'll be, but I think that will definitely be in the fold after playing as a true freshman last year. So many names, not very many answers, but I think that'll be a fun position to track throughout spring camp because there's definitely starting and reserve jobs up for grabs.
And you're right. You look at the roster, we have a lot of bodies there, and I think what Michigan fans have to like is we've got some size, we've got some speed. And I mean, the thing is, we haven't seen them play a lot yet,
right. But
we know one thing. There's talent there, and it's a good thing to go into spring football and have good, hard competition for those jobs.
Absolutely. There are two things you need to point out. The first is that Greg Madison, there's such a premium put on, okay, who's going to win the starting job? Well, in Greg Madison's scheme on the defensive line, those guys rotate so much, and even between positions, that's more of an honorary thing, okay, who gets the start. But beyond that, I mean, there's all kinds of combinations used, and so it goes beyond the 4 guys who win starting jobs. You need, 5 or 6 guys, really, that are going to play a lot behind those 4 starters. So there's a lot of jobs up for grabs, even if it's not for a starting position. And I think that's why, having so many bodies and so many options is such a good thing for Michigan. It's really going to free up Madison to do some things next year. And then the second thing is that, with spring camp, Brady's first 2 years, there hasn't been a true spring game. And the reason he's always said for that is because there hasn't been enough depth, particularly on the line. And he said yesterday that it's possible. I mean, I think that's the only time in the whole press conference he actually smiled, was that I think we have enough depth on the offensive and defensive lines to play a true spring game. That's what he really wants to do, and I think that really just kind of signals, okay, we're building this depth back up, and we're making progress, and we have options on the offensive line, we have options on the defensive line. They might be young, they might be inexperienced, but we have bodies we really like, kids who work hard, who get better every day, and I think that that's a position Michigan hasn't been in with the offensive and defensive lines in some time. And there might be there will be some growing pains throughout this process and probably into the season as young guys pick up experience and make mistakes and learn from them. But you have to really like where Michigan's at right now in terms of numbers, in terms of talent. And at some point, that talent's going to reach maturation. And I think you're really going to like what you see on the lines at Michigan.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Kyle. Something else I like is our linebacking core. For the first time in a long time, we've got some depth and some competition there. Talk about those guys.
That's an awesome position at Michigan right now. I just wrote about it the other day, and I had fun writing it because in 2010, I can't remember, I think there were 9 guys who started games in 2010 at linebacker at Michigan. And, last year was, 2 years ago it was 5. Last year it might have been 4. It's like, and you lost 2 years ago, you lost nobody from the 2 deep. And this year you're losing Kenny Demons, which he was a starter. But you have Joe Bolden, kind of an heir apparent waiting. And he played a lot last year. Joe Bolden did. Almost beat Demons for a starting job. So you're talking in 2 years losing only one guy from your 2 deep. And you have talent there. It's not just guys. It's Jake Ryan, who's an all Big Ten player and just a terror for for offenses. With what he can do for tackles for loss, forcing fumbles, and just making big plays. And of course, you got Desmond Morgan. He's going into his 3rd year as a starter. And then behind him, you have James Ross, a guy who almost beat out a 2-year starter last year for a position. I mean, the numbers and the experience and the talent, it's all off the charts. I think this is Michigan's deepest position, and it's going to be fun to watch what those guys can do. I think that they'll help cover maybe for some of the mistakes that the defensive line makes as it figures out its new guys and gets those guys experience and whatnot. I think Michigan will really rely on its linebacking core because there's so much talent there. And Jake Ryan is just such a good player. And he's a junior now. He's started all but 2 games of his career at Michigan. We've all seen what he can do. He strikes fear in players. I was speaking to Ace Sanders, the South Carolina receiver, before the Outback Bowl. I just asked him casually, what he thought when the matchup was announced. He's like, what I did? I went into our football offices, popped in some tape of the Michigan defense, watched about 3 plays, and all of a sudden, number 47 pops out to me. And I couldn't take my eyes off him. That guy can hit. That guy hurts people. Of course, number 47 is Jake Ryan. That's what defenses have to deal with. He just makes plays, and that's what he does. And he's really going to be the best playmaker on that defense. I think he was last year, and now with Kovacs gone, he certainly will be. I think he could be a real star. He was great as a freshman and even better as a sophomore. He's 3rd in the Big Ten in tackles for loss. He set a school record for fumbles forced at 5. And pair him with Desmond Morgan back, and then you have James Ross also at the weak side. At the weak side, and then Joe Bolden. You have some real good numbers there. Brady did one thing. Brady did say yesterday that Desmond Morgan, who started the past 2 years at weak side linebacker, will get some reps this spring and learn the Mike position, the middle linebacker position, that Demons position basically. And then Joe Bolden, who's the leader at the Mike position, will get some experience this spring at the weak side position. So those guys will be able to play both positions basically. And that'll just free up more options for those guys to get time because there's so many good players, and you got to find a way to get them on the field. And that'll give Michigan a lot of flexibility going forward.
Well, and you can tell by listening to Coach Madison that now going into his 3rd year as the defensive coordinator, finally, on the defensive line, at the linebacking core, and in the secondary, he has a lot of talent to work with, and you can just see that smile on his face. The pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together.
Yeah, exactly. You think about players for a second. Sometimes they're really great as true freshmen. Sometimes they're great in their 2nd year. But a lot of times, a lot of these players, if they're going to be players, they do it in their 3rd year. They make a huge leap because you've had 2 years under your belt of experience and of weight training, all this stuff, just the scheme. Schemes are incredibly complicated. It takes time to put them in. You don't get so much time to work on schemes when you're in college, and so that's for a player. I mean, the same deal goes for a coordinator who's trying to kind of do the same thing, implement his system and develop players along. And now you're entering your third year under Madison. He's his third year of the same scheme with the same players, barring turnover and graduation and all that kind of stuff. But there's a real familiarity that's being created now. I mean, you think about a guy like Desmond Morgan. Is nothing different than a Greg Madison coach scheme, and he's a junior now. And I think that you're going to see, for as good as it's been the past 2 years, I do think that you're going to see a step forward. That defense 2 years ago was really exceptional. I thought it was maybe took a slight step back last year, but I think that you're going to see take a step forward next year. I mean, it's got so much experience, especially at the linebacker position. It lost some guys up front on the defensive line, but it has really quality options coming back to replace those guys. And then, you lose Jordan Kovacs. That's the big concern. But you have guys you like to replace him. And, Jared Wilson, a true freshman last year, he played. I think he's kind of been groomed to take over for Kovacs. Diamante Thomas, a true freshman who's in spring camp as an early enrollee. He could go in there too. And there's just options everywhere. And there's, that you just have to like what you see with the talent that's coming in and all those guys getting experience in this scheme. And, that cohesion, I think, is really going to pay off as soon as this season.
Yeah, it's exciting. We have a lot to look forward to on both sides of the ball heading into spring and then the fall. One last question, though, Kyle. Coach Hoke mentioned this at his presser. He was asked about Will Hagerup. I don't know if we should be surprised or not, but the suspension is still in effect, and it sounded like Coach Hoke was saying it might remain in effect right through spring camp.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, he's been extremely tight-lipped. I've asked him every way I can imagine from every different angle, just with respect, because Hagerup is a senior. He hasn't done nice things at Michigan, but the question has to be asked about whether or not he's going to come back, and if he does, what has to be done, because this is his third suspension in 3 years. He's lost 6 games to suspension so far. He lost 1 game in 2010, 4 in 2011, and then he got suspended for the Outback Bowl last year. I mean, you have to really wonder if that's going to extend into next season. Those are legitimate questions, and Brady hasn't really said much, but we do know he's still suspended, and that's in my opinion, it's not going to change for some time, and I don't know when we'll hear what, but I don't think that we'll hear an answer in spring camp. I think that's going to be an issue that rolls on into the summer, and then we just go from there. Like I said, I'm not sure what has to be done for reinstatement, or if reinstatement's on the table. We don't know anything beyond the fact he's still suspended. And so that means for now, Matt Weil is the guy. And to be truthful, he's a quality option. Hagerup is an All-Big Ten. He's the All-Big Ten punter. He was the punter of the year last year. What Hagerup was at 45 yards a pop, and he has a huge leg. You can't really replace that. But Matt Weil, he averaged 48 yards a kick and 3 kicks in the Outback Bowl. He's been a good option. So, they have options and stuff, but it's a concern. He's a senior, and that's just something to watch going forward, I guess. It
would just be unfortunate if he misses his senior year, so we'll have to see how that develops. But you're right. It's nice to have Matt Weil around.
Yeah.
He's more than a quality backup.
It's just like everywhere else. I mean, turnover obviously is a very natural part of the cycle in college football, just, for obvious reasons. But, Michigan has options all over the place, and I really like what this team can do next year. I think the biggest question is the offensive line, because those guys are not as easily replaced at other positions. But at receiver, and especially defensive line, at safety, where you're losing some of your key guys, Michigan has some quality players stepping up, and I think that speaks really well for where this team will be in spring camp and then into fall camp, and obviously into the season.
Well, it will be an interesting next few weeks in Michigan football, of course, culminating with the spring game on April 13th. So, Kyle, we'll get you back on after it's all over and get your take on how the spring went. Any surprises? I'm sure there'll be a few. As always, Kyle, it's been a pleasure. It's been a couple of months since we've talked. Just want to remind our listeners, too, to check out Kyle's coverage of Michigan football at www.mlive.com, or better yet, get the MLive UM football app and get that Android or iTunes app store. That's what I do. and keep up with you guys and Nico over on the basketball side. So check it out. Kyle's in the midst of an 8-story series on spring football. How many of those have you done so far, Kyle?
7. Last one is Friday.
Oh, okay.
But they'll be online,
Okay,
so if you really want to look for them, they'll be on MLive.
Just a reminder to our listeners to check it out. So, Kyle, as always, it's been a pleasure having you, and we'll get you right back on after spring football.
Sounds great, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Thanks to Kyle Meinke for being our guest today. Don't forget to follow Kyle's coverage of Michigan football at www.mlive.com, or better yet, get the MLive football app from the Android or Apple app stores. If you're not a member here at GBM Wolverine, what in the world are you waiting for? Visit www.gbmwolverine.com today and sign up for membership. There's a lot going on right now on the Michigan athletic front, and there's no place better to keep up on your maize and blue news and conversation. Membership will also allow you to take part on our message board and see what other Wolverine watchers are saying. So don't delay, join today at www.gbmwolverine.com. The show is now available in the Android and Apple app stores, so get the Michigan Man Podcast app and take the show wherever you go. I'd also like to hear from you sometime. Our listener line is open 24/7. If you'd like to give us a piece of your mind, do so at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or you can email us at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. I'll have both the phone number and the email address on my show notes page. Next week we'll be back and talking Michigan basketball. Hopefully we'll be headed to the Sweet 16, both the men and the women's teams. There is also softball and baseball to catch up on, and hopefully some spring practice chatter, although it seems that not much leaks out during spring practices. At any rate, that's it for this week. Enjoy March Madness and have a great Wolverine week. We'll see you right back here next week with all the latest news surrounding Michigan athletics. We hope to have basketball beat writer Mark Snyder from the Detroit Free Press on the show, and hopefully we're talking about the great run the Wolverines are in the midst of. We shall see. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until then, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue.